I'm going to answer the very simple question, how much fuel can your vessel save through operational excellence? And doing that, I would like to split up a voyage into three parts, three main parts of doing a voyage. First part is planning. When you set up your voyage, you know where you're going, but you need to figure out which is the best way to get there, how fast, which route, and so on. Next part is actually doing the voyage, making sure the ship goes from A to B. And then you have the last part, which is following up, doing all the reporting that you want to do and are required to do, and also, of course, learning from what you've done. So if you look at the planning phase, and just to tell you one more thing, I'm going to be doing this a little bit based on my experience from running a tanker company, a tanker operator for 13 years, and also from being the CEO of Lean Marine. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag of experiences that I'm referring to. But what you see is that the more planning you do, the better you plan your voyage, the better chance you have of actually making a good voyage or doing a good voyage. And one very important thing in that is getting your route planning right. So you take into account the conditions the ship will meet. What are the currents? What are the depths? What's the weather? And are there any traffic separations and so on? So doing your planning is the first step. Second step, which I think is one of the more important one, is speed optimization, where I see a lot of companies do it a little bit offhand. Either they do full speed or they do slow steaming, which is always the same speed. But my experience is that there's a lot to be saved, both monetary-wise and fuel-wise, by having a proper routine, a proper algorithm for figuring out for this voyage, which is the financially best speed to go at. And also, of course, if you can save a bit of fuel on top of that, which you usually end up doing, there's a lot to be had. One example that I've seen is for a tanker operator, again, 50,000-ton MR tankers. We saw average savings of about $1,000 per day by just implementing a proper procedure on how to optimize the speed, how to figure out which speed is right for this voyage, not for every voyage, and how do we keep and make sure we stay on that speed. So there's a lot to be saved. Moving on to the execution. There, of course, you're back to your crew. You have your captain and the bridge crew doing the navigation, following the instructions, following the plan. You have your optimized speed. And here again, it gets important that whatever planning you did, whatever you decided is being followed. And here, a lot of companies have really good systems for following this up. But there are also a lot of companies that rely on fairly scant information on what's actually happening on board. If the route is followed, if the speed instructions are followed, if other instructions when it comes to cargo heating and so on are being followed or not. And here I think is one area where there's a lot more to do and a lot more to find. And another area where there's a lot to save is optimizing propulsion. Propulsion today, especially if you have a controllable pitch propeller, can be optimized. Usually there's a fixed curve that the engine and propeller pitch follow. We've noticed that if you look at that and try to optimize it adaptively to the conditions the ship are in, there is a lot to save. This is an example from a 14,000-ton tanker, and this tanker actually proved a fairly substantial saving. You managed to get the RPM down, i.e. less engine power. At the same time, you pitched the propeller up, so you got more hydrodynamic power into the water, and you got 20% saving at 11 knots. That is pretty substantial money that we see can be had at a fairly simple cost and a simple installation. Going to the third part, the post-voyage. Here, there's a lot to be saved on the operation as it is. If you have the information, then you can do your reporting simpler and you can make better decisions. One thing we noticed in Laurin Maritime was that we did a lot of things. We implemented a lot of fuel-saving equipment. We did a lot of process changes. We tried to save fuel and tried to improve the operations, but we couldn't see the changes. Because basically, if you look at the different measures, a lot of them presented here today, what you can do to save fuel, to be more operationally efficient, most of them end up in the 1 to 10% savings area. Some of them you can save a lot more, but most of them are sort of reasonably small savings on a percentage scale. And if this is the equipment you're using to measure your fuel consumption or whatever it is, then it's going to be very difficult to find a saving of 2%. Because most likely, unless you have a proper system, you're going to have a measurement error in your reports of 5 to 10%. Most speed logs are not better than 5% accuracy. So there is always an issue of having the correct data to be able to make the right decisions. So what I've noticed and what I live by is if you can measure it, you can manage it. Because otherwise you might be able to measure the big changes, the big things you see, but you can't see if a variable frequency controller on a pump makes a difference or not. For that, you need to have a lot more data. You need to have performance management. So how much data do you need? Well, depends on what you want to do. If you want to know where the ship is and how fast she's been going on average for the last 24 hours, Noon report is fine. But there's not going to be very much accurate data to get from that. Very difficult to get any decent analysis out of that data. So you're going to need automated reporting. You're going to need a system that collects the data for you, removes all human interfaces where there are measurement reports by default, and gets you the data on a high frequency. And of course, if you want to take the next step and use all the buzzwords with machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, you need a lot of data. You need the magical unicorn big data. Once you have that, though, you can start learning a lot. You can start seeing how wind affects your ship. You can start figuring out when the time is right to do your hull cleaning. So you're not just cleaning your anti-fouling away, but actually making a difference. And you can see the results afterwards. So that's one thing I'm a big proponent of. Make sure you get the data you need to make informed decisions, because there is a lot to save in having the data. Again, this is just a few screenshots of what we do. I won't go into that because there are a lot of systems and I care which system you get, but the most important thing to me is get a system so you can improve your operations. Coming back to if you can measure it, you can manage it. So, how do you manage it? And here I think is one aspect that is sometimes worked a lot with in companies and sometimes somewhat neglected. And that is looking at the company culture. We've been hearing a lot of people today saying what's going to be important, what's going to change, need to change in 10 years. And they've been saying leadership, they've been saying attitude, they've been saying mentality. But you need to change the mentality. It doesn't change itself. We are here today to change our mentality, to change our attitude. But you also need to educate your crew and the people on board so they can use the tools they have and learn from them. And we noticed on one of the vessels, we had a performance management system on board. For one reason or the other, we didn't get anybody on board the ship to educate them. But they got the manuals, they got the system up and running, nothing happened. We got our performance management guy on board for a week and had 9.4% saving from that day on. So getting the information out to the people who are using it is extremely important. Make sure everybody in the company is pulling in the right direction. That's where there's a lot of operational savings to be had. And as we all know, because we're here today, we need to do this today. Yes, you can wait until 2050, but there's so much more to do up until then. So it's time to start changing the culture now. It's time to start educating the people. Time to start doing the investments that make sense where you can get your money back, because that's going to improve your balance sheet quickly. So the question was, how much fuel could your vessel get through operational excellence? And I don't have a percentage figure, but there's a lot to be saved for all of us. If you've done a lot of the things, great, there's less to be done, but there's always more. There's always processes that can be improved. There's always things to look at to get further down the road. Thank you very much.